Namaste. Hmm. So last week we launched ourselves towards the study of the life divine, at least by theme. We intend not to read through the book this time, line by line, from page 1 to 1100 and beyond. Rather, we're hoping to look at it thematically. Take the large themes, maybe spend a few weeks on each. We'll see that they intersect and build upon other themes that we meet. So, no doubt there will be repetition and a chance to understand more deeply how one thing folds into another. It should be instructive, it should be a joy. Of course, there is a great logic in going through it from beginning to end. There are two books, as you know. Book one, when it was brought out in 1939 as a book bringing together all that had been written in the aria, and then some things improved, and one chapter added. It was the first time that it appeared in that way. People had lost sight of what was in the Life Divine if they did not already have copies of the arias volumes. So last week, we read the entirety of the first chapter, chapter 1, The Human Aspiration. We noted that it was written probably in the middle of June 1914. He had an earlier essay, partly worked out. He set it aside, didn't use it, and wrote this in 3 days, as we noted last week. This essay he never touched. He was satisfied, he was pleased with the result from the beginning. And one can see why. Uh, how could this statement be perfected? When you go to the world of physics and you read Einstein's first discoveries bursting upon the world, you see that they could not be bettered. They were simple and elegant. So too is Sri Aurobindo's statement here. And it brings into one view all that we have achieved in the past, what is our present potential, and where we might go with all of this. And indeed, the underlying theme, as he says right away, is the irrepressible impulse towards perfection, the search after pure truth, unmixed bliss. He follows it with chapters 2 and 3, which deal with two negations. Sri Aurobindo has just asserted that there is one reality. In fact, the title that he gave to this first book of the Life Divine is Omnipresent Reality and the Universe. This is not a reality that we have to climb to and leave the universe behind. Rather, it is omnipresent. Yes, it is there. It is here. We've just recited, haven't we? The Purnamadaha Purnamidam, that is full. This is full. The full is taken out of the full. Take out the full from the full. The full remains. Fullness everywhere, fullness in the transcendence, fullness in the universe all about us, manifesting that, fullness in the person who speaks the truth. He makes it claimed that this is going to be his worldview. But there are two things that he has to deal with here. One is the obvious dominance when he's writing in the early 20th century of material science and its domination of philosophy and encroachment upon what we would call the spheres of religion and psychology. So the first negation is the materialist denial. Nothing exists except matter. So Sri Aurobindo goes to our very familiar by now Taittiriya Upanishad and brings forth that statement. Matter is Brahman. Annam is real. Sri Aurobindo does not deny that. But to insist simply on the reality of matter is to deny spirit and to declaim that only matter or force is real, is a genuine state of being. So he states that case in the second chapter. But that's not the only denial. The other is perhaps the greater enemy to us, and it's the refusal of the ascetic to say no to life. I will not do it. It is an ugly mess. It is a deviation from what is the unitive truth of spiritual reality. There is a beyond, no doubt. It is spirit free from change. But to draw a demarcation between what is spirit and what is not is to miss the point, and you miss the omnipresence. You reside simply in what is beyond. That transversal line that separates you becomes permanent. Your hermitage is only in the alone. Plotinus, the alone in the flight to the alone. There's a truth in it. Sri Aurobindo does not deny it. But he also does not deny the materialist standpoint. His vision is so vast and comprehensive that all these standpoints are enclosed in the nature of his experience. And we must remember that Sri Aurobindo is not writing as a philosopher. It is revelatory, it is philosophic in phrasing, etc. But he was not a trained philosopher, had no real interest in it. But he was asked if he could present to the modern human mind what was the nature of this unitive experience that was building in him, a power that was building in him. And he said, I can. Arya was the answer. It was the vessel which carried this message out to the world. So these 3 chapters were there right at the start. What is the experience and what are the contradictions of this experience? And now we must deal with them. But in chapter 4, he returns to his main theme, reality omnipresent. And note, reality omnipresent. So not the adjective and then the noun, but the noun and then the adjective, which suggests a certain French expression. Remember, during these months, Mira Richard and her husband Paul, who were helping him launch this journal, were with him. And so one wonders about the phrasing. Sri Aurobindo spoke French eloquently, fluently. But this point in the chapter, drawing immediately from the Taittiriya Upanishad again, is that both these denials, or put it differently, both these affirmations that matter is real, that spirit is real, converge in a larger experience of this omnipresent reality. Now, clearly, there's a great deal of material in these 60-second summaries I'm giving you of these many grand chapters. We'll have the chance to move through them, and you can always go back and listen to them in audio and sometimes even see them in video on our YouTube website, our YouTube channel. Proceeding to chapter 5. If we've established there is a reality that is not simply transcendent, but takes cosmic form, then what about us? What about our place? And the destiny of the individual, chapter 5, insists that omnipresence must include the formation, the manifestation of a real individual, not a fiction, not something that comes in a moment, passes away, the nature of transience, things as we see them then, now. It must persist. And to Sri Aurobindo, the soul must have within it the nature of the infinity from what it comes. It must have within it the power of eternity, the timeless quality, so that it doesn't get rubbed out, doesn't get erased in the always enduring cosmos. It too, like the cosmos, must be unending. The soul is key to the cosmos. Without the soul, if there's a hidden purpose in the universe, it cannot be affected. The universe has no time for that. It would be the will of an individual expressing something that is embedded within, that would manage the efflorescence of that, not the universal energy. So he takes it farther in chapter 6, man in the universe, the progressive revelation, as he writes, of a transcendent, a luminous reality from material conditions to reveal an eventual bliss. Satchit Ananda must be possible. There is a movement in the universe to begin from a basis of matter, to express life, to become conscious in mind, and to become unified in all these three levels in what Sri Aurobindo here calls God. Not God in the normal theistic sense, but something that is a greater power of being, a more conscious power of being than what we see manifest in our limited human personalities. And to do this, to reveal this progressively, we must dive deep. But which we are we talking about? This soul is not apparent on the surface. So in the next chapter, the ego and the dualities, emerging from darkness, from the great fall, we are dealing with a limited experience in a fractured form, and dualities, while they seem to be metaphysical in principle, are the very tools that we use to go beyond the egoistic limitations, beyond formal presentation, and get to the nature of a self within that can actually attain unity. The ego through the mind can try to address the problem of life, the division natural to our experience, and want to unify it, theorize about it, but it can't do it. That unity can't be achieved from the nature of the mind. It can be achieved from the power of the soul. The next chapter takes us to the methods of Vedantic knowledge. If we're going to know this soul, what is this spark within us that is somehow unified with a termless, timeless self which is beyond, and yet which populates itself as all this universe? How do we do it? How do we reach that? So with reason, we can begin the inquiry from the level of mind. We can philosophize, build models of consciousness, but it doesn't take us to the actual experience which changes us, which can potentially transform us. For that, intuition must stride into the picture with its brilliance and offer a knowledge by identity, which carries us beyond our ordinary experience. Until we get that, we are still laboring with reason and its limits, and will be subject to doubt. When we have that experience, doubt tends to dissipate. Of course, there is the gravid condition of the human where you always fall back to the way you used to be, the good old way you used to be, and that will hold you up. But you can be introduced to what feels concretely identical to you in the self, as in the psyche, and in the world through a widening and deepening experience. Intuition can lead one to that. So if we now recognize that this is what we must do, and to utilize methods of seeing deeply, meditation, becoming dynamic in our work, then who is it that we're looking for? The pure existent, Sat. So you'll remember, of course, that Sat Chit Ananda is a theme that runs constantly through Sri Aurobindo's Life Divine. And once it's been iterated in Vedantic thinking, say 3rd, 4th century CE, Common Era, then it never goes away. It populates itself into all sorts of philosophies, Tantric, Vedantic, etc., etc. Everybody wants some of this idea that there is a conscious existent whose nature is bliss. The first time we meet this is in devotional Vedanta. You would think that it would come up in Advaita Vedanta. It does not. It's theistic Vedanta that manifests this idea of Sat Chit Ananda. It is very dear to Sri Aurobindo because you'll remember in his personal voyage, he began with a liberation into the static or the immense, the unqualified absolute seen as Brahman, as a nirvanic experience, which rubbed out his transitory being and plunged him into only that. But that wasn't the end of his spiritual growth. That is the end of a great many sadhanas. That is the goal of Vedanta. Most Vedanta. But Sri Aurobindo continued beyond and had the experience of a universal Godhead, a person, capital P, who existed everywhere, who's infinitely divided. And so, and so, this idea persists and arises in this chapter. One indivisible, that is pure existence, says the Chandogya Upanishad. One can merge into it or know it by identity. And it's worth reading, if you'll permit me, a quotation from his book. This is in the collected works of Sri Aurobindo, the newer set from page 85. This is something that you can learn as a sort of prose mantra. World existence is the ecstatic dance of Shiva, which multiplies the body of the god numberlessly to the view. It leaves that white existence precisely where and what it was, ever is, and ever will be. Its sole absolute object is the joy of the dancing. So that is that pure existence. That is Sat. But Sat Chit Ananda is a triple term. Next, conscious force, chapter 10. And he spends this chapter expressing what this existent, this Sat, does in manifesting its power of consciousness, but never consciousness only as an abstract awareness. Always the divine consciousness is identical with force. So it is not just chit, it is chit shakti. It is implied. The term Sat Chit Ananda would simply profess consciousness. But to manifest a universe, there must be a will, there must be a power, and that is Shakti. The capacity for this conscious being to compress itself, to become dense, articulate. This is that power. Chit Shakti. In the 11th chapter, he proceeds to the question of delight. So if Ananda is the crown of a conscious existence, and delight is supreme, and we've seen in the Taittiriya Upanishad that at least that Vedantic text sees bliss as the very origin of all things, of the vast consciousness, the Mahas consciousness, of the supramental, and all of its powering through the various levels, manifesting the rest, the balance of the cosmos, mind, life, body, matter, food, all are expressions of an innate delight. At the top, it is sheer, but it is marbled through all levels of existence, discoverable to our experience. And it's only when we can experience and find it behind every disguise, behind every atomic reality, every cosmic reality. Multiply the cosmoses, multiply the universes. Delight must be their origin. To get into that state of delight, to understand that it is the very nature of being, it is your most real self, is the key to liberation. It is crucial that we should become that. But there is a problem. Ananda completes the equation, but we have the problem of evil, the problem of pain, the problem of suffering, which confronts the mind. The Taittiriya Upanishad also noted that. You remember as you've read through it, if you see this, you become that. If you see this other, you become that. So what is your view? How Catholic is your experience? And I use Catholic in the original sense. So the problem is to answer why there must be pain in the world. Sri Aurobindo will confront it more directly, but his next chapter, Delight of Existence, the Solution, declares that Ananda pervades all. One must grow beyond the finite scope of your personal frame to enforce harmony in the individual and to perceive it in the whole. If the universe is a breathing out of delight, then to that cosmic spirit who dwells in all the beings who seemingly suffer, there is still only bliss at the bottom. The forms, by dint of their division and resting content in their separation, each from the other, in a sense, voluntarily remain trapped in a limited experience and can't grow. Now, since he's going to suggest that evolution is the way out of this all, and that all powers of spirit have the opportunity to evolve if they so select, then there is an answer for escape. But that even in the suffering, even in the denial of delight, there is delight. But one must be vast to experience it. Of course, this was the nature of his journey, wasn't it? When he leaped beyond the cosmos and then came back to embrace the cosmos, and then took up a sadhana to enforce the unity that all is. This is his experience and his understanding of what is the only solution to a philosophic problem. It is an inner solution. It is an experience built on expanding and deepening experience. So, in chapter 13, he moves on to Maya, the divine Maya. Satchidananda measures itself out from the infinite into the finite, creates form out of the formless, and this is a power of creation, of manifestation, which is native to supermind. Does not exist below, but this is the divine Maya. This is the beginning of the many. If there's a one existence, and it is conscious of itself, and it has singular, you might say, delight, then how do we get a manifested multiple universe which appears to us, in us, and around us? That is the job of the divine Maya. The next chapter. Have I put you all to sleep? I hope not. The next chapter is the supermind as creator. The supermind mediates, in a sense, between the one, Satchit Ananda, because it is one. It may be triune, but it's still one, and the many. So if the divine Maya has measured out the infinite into numberless forms from its own substance, then it has certain features within itself. It must have a comprehending aspect so that it holds all manifestation within the scope of its oneness. It can exceed it. That it would be apprehending, that it would have the capacity, the power to reach out and to look into each corner of its being and know what is there. So these two prominent features feature in this chapter in The Supermind is Creator. There are 3 chapters on the supermind. This is the first. Chapter 15 is the Supreme Truth Consciousness, where he will unroll to us the dynamic nature of divine being, that is not static. It is a power of cosmic seeing, of vision, and of ordering knowledge, that what it sees is created spontaneously. And it has within it an inherent order because it comes from true being. Sat can't do anything that doesn't result in other than satya, truth. So true being acts in true ways. True being, creating multiplicity, holds all multiplicity in harmony. There is an order. There is a generation of power that proceeds from one moment to the next. If there is a march forward, it's because there is an intent. If there is change, it is because it is desirable. If there is change and a movement forward, it can only be done because there is delight at the bottom of it. So the Supreme Truth Consciousness is all of this. In the next chapter, the 16th, the triple status of the supermind is described. Again, we come back to the apprehending and the comprehending nature of the supramental, what is beyond mind. So there is an equal self-extension of Satchit Ananda as oneness, the one, within this view. So you might say this is the upper layer of the supramental, coming out of the one and maintaining that oneness. From that, there's a stable, conscious self, and also the individual standing in balance. The Jivatman, the spark of the divine self, part of the larger cosmic self or pure self, that stands in connection with the universal. So this individual, this universal poise, each can reach up back to the one and feel connected with each other. The supporting concentration of this supramental consciousness can project itself into movement, and in so doing seem to limit itself in a particular posture within the whole. It isn't really simply relegated to that or delegated to that, but that can, in a sense, shine. The spotlight can be on that for a moment. Yeah? So I think if I can find a passage, um, affirming, this is from page 160 in the version we're using, affirming, as we have done, the absoluteness of that, not limited by our ideas of unity, not limited by our ideas of multiplicity, affirming the unity as a basis for the manifestation of the multiplicity, and the multiplicity as the basis for the return to oneness and the enjoyment of unity in the divine manifestation, we need not burden our present statement with these discussions or undertake the vain labor of enslaving to our mental distinctions and definitions the absolute freedom of the divine infinite. So he's advising us, don't worry about the philosophical conundrums here. You want this experience. So he's talked about that one, that balance and diversity and oneness, unity and diversity, which is the secondary poise of the supramental. And then in the third, the capacity to isolate, to focus upon the individual aspect. So all three terms of existence, right? What is transcendent? What is universal? What is individual that he often speaks about in his writings on yoga, his other writings in philosophy, and prominently here in The Life Divine, are there in seed as the very foundation, or you might say the fount of those as presented here to us in this triple universe. But who are we really? That question still remains. And so in chapter 17, the divine soul, he discusses the source and the home ground of what this is. And he does say divine soul, because he's speaking about what we will come to know as the Jivatman above, what is impartable from the universal self. Can't describe it as anything except, well, can we find a metaphor? I think maybe a good one is like a diamond with innumerable facets cut into it. Every facet is a face of that self, unique to itself, but part of that. And all the facets can see and feel each other as a unified whole. And all have a sense from whence that came. So, oneness must include the joy of difference in unity. Now, for us here, those are grand words. We have to aspire for them. And perhaps we get a scent of that in our lives. Perhaps we have a moment where, as a collective, we feel uplifted into that. But we can't stay in that unless we have discovered and live within in our own soul. Now, here, as we shall see, that divine soul is represented as our psychic inmost nature. But we're not there to talk about that yet. We're going back now, having touched upon the divine soul, to chapter 18, mind and supermind. And I'm looking at our time and recognizing that, oh dear, to get through the 28th chapter of this first book might keep you here beyond your bedtime. So let's do at least through chapter 19, and then we'll go from chapter 20 on next time, perhaps. So, mind and supermind, then, chapter 18. We talked about this third level of the supramental consciousness, not really separated from the one above it or that from the one above it. All it is an indivisible whole, but that apprehending capacity of the supramental to project its consciousness out and identify itself with a particular movement. That permits a self-ignoring to arise beneath it, which admits of error and division. Mind is a final derivation or operation of that movement in supermind. We haven't touched upon the nature of the overmind yet. That's a few chapters away. But this is what will lead to the manifestation of an overmental layering of consciousness from and through which the mind derives from the power of the supramental consciousness. So in chapter 19, which was a chapter very much revised by Sri Aurobindo, he went through this a good deal. He describes how life itself is an expression of Chit Shakti and creates, maintains, and destroys forms. So we have seen now that there is a supramental range of being. Our connection to it is through our divine soul. That is who we're going to be. And now he's suggesting an involution of powers, a mind that derives out of supermind and arrives in the next phase at life. And this idea that life expresses, creates, maintains, and destroys is the very first shloka, you might say, of Sri Lalita Sahasranam. So there is a tantric echo there, a great tradition of wisdom drawing on the power of the Divine Mother. Sri Aurobindo has not yet written about the Divine Mother so far in the Life Divine, but here is a theme that's consonant with that. When we come to life, it is she who gives the cosmos and the individual and the peoples and the plants and the herbs and the planet as a whole life. So next week we'll take up chapter 20, death, desire, and incapacity. If I still have the capacity or can recover the capacity to speak. You've been very gracious to listen to my croaky voice tonight. So with your permission, we'll set back on the table the Life Divine and resume next week. Perhaps we'll do more than just those chapters left in book one. Perhaps we can continue into book two parts there. And we'll be finished soon, and then we'll take up themes. But you can see how many themes have already been built in just the 19 chapters that we've looked at. So much to talk about, so much to delve into, because these, I just mentioned them. We didn't delve into them or study them. We will. So to Savitri then, if you've another minute. Book 7, the Book of Yoga. Let's make it practical. Canto 2, the parable of the search for the soul. We'll begin on page 482. All the world's possibilities in man are waiting as the tree waits in its seed. His past lives in him. It drives his future's pace. His presence acts, fashion his coming fate. The unborn gods hide in his house of life. The demons of the unknown overshadow his mind casting their dreams into live molds of thought, the molds in which his mind builds out its world. His mind creates around him its universe. All that has been renews in him its birth. All that can be is figured in his soul. Issuing in deeds its scores on the roads of the world, obscure to the interpreting reason's guess, lines of the secret purpose of the gods. In strange directions runs the intricate plan. Held back from human foresight is their end, and the far intention of some ordering will, or the order of life's arbitrary chance, finds out its settled poise and fated hour. Our surface, watched in vain by reason's gaze, invaded by the impromptus of the unseen, helpless records the accidents of time, the involuntary turns and leaps of life. Only a little of us foresees its steps. Only a little has will and purposed pace. A vast subliminal is man's measureless part. The dim subconscient is his cavern base. Abolished vainly in the walks of time, our past lives still in our unconscious selves, and by the weight of its hidden influences is shaped our future's self-discovery. Thus, all is an inevitable chain, and yet a series seems of accidents. The unremembering hours repeat the old acts. Our dead past round our future's ankles clings and drags back the new nature's glorious stride. Or from its buried corpse, old ghosts arise, old thoughts, old longings, dead passions live again, recur in sleep or move the waking man to words that force the barrier of the lips, to deeds that suddenly start and o'erleap his head of reason and his guardian will. An old self lurks in the new self we are. Hardly we escape from what we once had been. In the dim gleam of habit's passages, in the subconscious darkling corridors, all things are carried by the porter nerves and nothing checked by subterranean mind, unstudied by the guardians of the doors, and passed by a blind instinctive memory. The old gang dismissed, old canceled passports serve. Nothing is wholly dead that once had lived. In dim tunnels of the world's being and in ours, the old rejected nature still survives. The corpses of its slain thoughts raise their heads and visit mind's nocturnal walks in sleep. Its stifled impulses breathe and move and rise. All keeps a phantom immortality. Irresistible are nature's sequences. The seeds of sins renounced sprout from hid soil. The evil cast from our hearts once more we face. Our dead selves come to slay our living soul. A portion of us lives in present time, a secret mass in dim inconscience groups. Out of the inconscient and subliminal arisen, we live in the mind's uncertain light and strive to know and to master a dubious world whose purpose and meaning are hidden from our sight. Above us dwells a superconscient God, hidden in the mystery of his own light. Around us is a vast of ignorance, lit by the uncertain ray of human mind. Below us sleeps the inconscient, dark and mute. Good then. We like a riddle. We like a challenge. We came here for that. Be constant, be busy. Thank you. Namaste. Jai Ma. Look forward to seeing you soon.